So like I said, you guys get to enjoy me today again. But do keep Colin and his mother in your prayers. Anne ended up in the hospital last night. So that's why dear Colin isn't the one speaking to you today. But definitely keep her health in your prayers, as well as Colin and Jackie. They've had a lot going on. So we do want to hold them up. So today, I'm actually going to be doing my testimony of sorts. It's kind of a testimony, kind of not a testimony. Some have heard me give my testimony before. Some have heard a little bit of my story. But today it's literally the testimonies of testimony. So I hope you're prepared for it. Now, what inspired me for this is literally Psalm 71, and it's actually verses 15 through 18. And what this says is it kind of just starts out, and it says, "My mouth will tell of all of your righteous deeds, of your saving acts all day long, though I know not how to relate them all. I will come and proclaim your mighty acts, sovereign Lord. I will proclaim your righteous deeds, yours alone. Since my youth, God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come." And this is kind of what I'm basing my testimony off of today. Now, testimonies, when we hear that word, we think of me telling my story. And you getting to hear a little bit about my life and things like that. But sometimes testimonies aren't a verbal thing. Sometimes they are lived out through the eyes of other people. And so today I'm going to tell you about some people who were living testimonies in my life that are part of my testimony. So I could probably tell you a load of family members. My family, thankfully, I was raised in a fairly Christian home. My aunt and uncle were Christians. Their kids were evangelists. They went out singing and did things. I was raised in a church, not necessarily a good church, but I was raised in a church. And then as I was older, we changed churches and so on and so forth. But I have two people in my life and my family directly that I would consider their lives being a big part of my testimony. And one of them is the matriarch of our family. We call her the legend. This year she turns 98 years old. And her name is Elaine. And I've always known her as Aunt Elaine. I just missed the E. I just skipped it. For the longest time, I literally thought her name was just Lane with an L. And I just called her Auntie Lane. It wasn't until I was probably like 15 or 16 that I realized her name was Elaine. And it was Aunt Elaine. Took me a long time to figure that one out. But she and her husband, Maynard, my Uncle Maynard, was quite the joker. And those two are really a big part of my childhood story. They were an amazing Christian couple. And from the time I was small, I remember sitting in their living room and we'd sing songs of worship in their house. Everything started with prayer. Uncle Maynard was an interesting old man. He was a weirdo. I think he was original. You'll hear a lot of weirdo stories today, by the way, but he's one of those big things. And my Auntie Lane has always been into the family and who the family was and carrying on family stories. And she was always a storyteller in our life. And she was the one who encouraged me to do things and to step outside of the box. She was the one who encouraged me to go to a Christian summer camp, which was very entertaining in itself. I learned a lot at Christian summer camp. But she was always one to encourage God in my life in many different places. And she is one that still to this day is one of my biggest supporters of what I'm doing here. And she is just one piece of my family that is part of my testimony. Now, the next person I'm going to talk about is my Aunt Linda, and her name was Linda. I must have had a speaking problem when I was a child because I like to smush names together. Her name was Linda, and I like to claim this is where I got the weirdo gene from, because she had a green car. She drove a green car, and I mean, it had to be like a 1950 something. It was old. It was green, and I remember I used to sit in the back seat. Even the interior was bright green leather, and the car was named Fern. And Fern took her everywhere. And she was a very small, petite old lady. She was one of those old ladies that I don't know how she saw over the steering wheel. And riding in the car with her was always an adventure. And so Aunt Linda would always get in Fern, and we didn't listen to the radio. We sang songs from Camelot in the car. So as a small child, I remember sitting in the back of Fern being petrified because the headliner was falling out of the roof, and it was all green, and she's driving behind the wheel and singing songs from Camelot. And I think that's where I got my love for Broadway shows as well. But she had a beautiful garden in her house, and she grew roses, and a lot of the stuff that I've learned about gardening, I've learned from her. But she was also an amazing Christian woman. She never missed church, ever. It did not matter what was going on, she never missed church. And she would pray with us, and she's one of those, we only saw her about once a year. But when we saw her, we had her full attention. Didn't matter what was going on. If we wanted to play games, she played games with us. If we wanted to watch movies, she watched movies with us. She was always around. And she always would call. I had a voicemail on my phone for a long time, right before her and my uncle passed away, that they would call every year and sing me happy birthday on my phone. And I had it saved on my voicemail for years. If only I could go back and get it. But literally, they sang happy birthday to me. Just amazing Christian people in my life. Now, those are the two family members I mentioned because I could go through an entire line of family members, and I'm not going to do that today. But their life in me was kind of inspired with Proverbs 22, where it says, train up a child in the way that they should go, and they will not depart from it. Now, there's many other things I learned from my Aunt Elaine and my Aunt Linda about being a good person and doing things for other people and caring for other people. And I think that that's something that I carry on through this to this day. Now, kind of after them, I'm going to move on to two people called Bill and Linda. And they were our neighbors in my childhood house. They lived right next door. And at this time, it was 1985, big economic turndown in the U.S. And my parents had lost everything. And we were selling off everything that we could do. And my parents worked full time, both out of the house. And I was probably about 5. And my brother was about 10 or 11. But our neighbors next door, Bill and Linda, they were the ones you didn't have to knock when you went into their house. You just walked right in. And I can remember getting home from school, and the first place we did was always go check in with Bill and Linda. And Bill would always watch football. He was a big football fan, and he would sit in his recliner chair and watching football. And we'd come in the house, and he always called me sis. And he'd go, sis, are you getting us ice cream? So as soon as I came in, I knew I had to go get ice cream. But Bill was a bit of a weirdo, too, because he liked to microwave his ice cream. Don't ask me why. What's the point of having ice cream? Well, just pour milk in a bowl. But he would always microwave his ice cream, but I always got a popsicle, one of the ice lollies, that split in 2, so I could have one for each hand. And we would go sit out on his back deck, and they had this beautiful back deck. And we would sit and we would talk about my day. And we would sit out there and we'd talk about what happened and what was going on and everything like that. And then when we were done, he would get done with his ice cream, and I'd be done with my ice lollies, and I'd have my 2 sticks. And it was always tradition to stick the sticks in between the deck rails. And so they were underneath the deck from there on. They just disappeared. And I did find out a couple of years ago when somebody bought the house that when they pulled up the deck, they found like hundreds of popsicle sticks under that deck. But I remember those conversations with Bill, and I remember his conversations with his wife, Linda, and they were a sweet Southern couple. They're from Oklahoma, and they both had these really thick accents. And I just remember from being a small child that as soon as I walked in their house, I knew that I was welcome, and I knew that I was loved. And no matter what was going on throughout the school day, whether or not my parents were home or not, it was if something were going on, go to Bill and Linda. And they taught us all sorts of fun things. They used to grow giant zucchini in their backyard. Like their courgettes were massive, like award-winning courgettes and squash and just these big things. But it was always more about teaching us something and giving us a lesson. And that was Bill and Linda. Now, Bill and Linda were also firm. You didn't get away with nothing with Bill and Linda's house. Because, again, like I said, they had these saloon doors on their kitchen. And you would walk into their kitchen. And the thing was, they were tall, and I was a kid. And I always thought I could get away with things, but I never could. But those saloon doors would open and close, and I thought I was being real sneaky. And Bill would always call from his chair, "Sis, I hear you in there. What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Nothing." And I'd always be getting a popsicle or something like that. But they were always very firm with me as well. As much as they were loving, and the conversations that we had after school were very much, fun conversations, I had a lot of life lessons I learned there as well. We had a lot of talks about what happens when people are mean to you and when people say things you don't like and how to respond to them. And there were a lot of lessons I learned from Bill and Linda. Now the next one, her name is Georgia, and she was in our church. And she was, at the time when I was young, she was probably in her 80s, 90s. She was an older lady, and she would sit right in the very front row. And I loved Georgia, but she could not carry a tune in a bucket at all. She could not sing. But it didn't stop her from singing either. And when we sang songs, especially old hymns, she would sing out so very loudly that you could hear Georgia over the rest of the congregation singing. And when she prayed with her hands up. And she would just, you could just tell as she was singing, she was loving on God. She was there for Jesus. It didn't matter who else heard. There was no qualms. You could go up to her and go, "Georgia, you need to be quiet." And she'd just sing louder. So there's people there like Georgia. She's one of those people, the only interactions I had with Georgia were during church. I didn't know her outside of church. I knew who she was, but I didn't know outside of church. All I know is she's the red-haired lady in the front row who sings really loud and off-key. But she always had her hands up. She was the first one when somebody got baptized to start clapping and hooting and hollering and throwing a party over it. Georgia was a character. Georgia didn't have to speak to me, but I knew who Jesus was to Georgia just from sitting a few rows behind her in church. Now, the next person I'm going to talk about her name is Wendy. And Wendy was one of my Sunday school teachers. And the funny thing is, Wendy just happens to be George's daughter-in-law. There's no connection there, but that's who she happens to be. Now, Wendy died when I was young. She died when she was 37. And she battled with cancer. For many, many years, she battled with cancer. And her kids were about my age. We all went to school together, and she was one of my Sunday school teachers. In fact, she was one of my Sunday school teachers when I first started at a new church. And she was a lovely woman. Absolutely lovely woman. And she was the same way. She would teach and she would pray over us. And it wasn't until later that I really kind of fully understood the life that Wendy lived, because she had cancer treatments and literally she has 4 kids, loads of kids at home. And yet when she came to church, all of that was left outside the door. Never once did we have a Sunday school lesson talking about how horrible cancer was or how horrible her life was. We always had a lesson about what Jesus will do in your life and what God can do in your life. There was always a sense of positivity with Wendy. And again, she loved on us no matter what. No matter how her day had been, when she had her last treatment, how sick she was feeling, she loved on us. And it was something as a kid in her Sunday school class I will never forget to this day. Now, the next person I'm going to talk about is Linda. And Linda was my Sunday school teacher when I was a little bit older, about 12 or 13. And I can only give you topics. I think I was an angel when I was 12 or 13. If you ask my mom, she says the exact opposite of that. I think you should listen to me. I was lovely. But like most teenagers, they're a little rough. And Linda, the beautiful Linda, had been in the military, and she was a tough lady. But she was also a very soft-hearted woman. Now, Linda drove a really fast blue car. I liked it was a sports car. It went really fast. And she would drive it really fast. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And she had this bright red hair and this brighter personality, just amazing personality. And for years, I met her probably the late 90s when I was about 11 or 12. And at that point, she had been suffering from breast cancer for about 6 or 7 years. And she had multiple surgeries and multiple rounds of chemo. And then the chemo medication had caused her really bad arthritis. And her hands were kind of crinkled, and she was sick a lot. And I remember Sunday school when we'd walk in, some days Linda wasn't there because Linda wasn't well. But Linda and I had a very special relationship, and she was one of those people who kind of took me under her wing when I was a rough kid. And she did Bible studies with me, and she took me out to get meals. And she poured the love of Jesus into me. And each time that she would call and she'd go, "Do you want to go for a ride?" Sure. So she'd come pick me up from the house, and we'd talk about whatever was going on in a teenage girl's life. And there were some times that she would console me with very nice things and tell me, oh, it's all right, this is life. And sometimes she would give me very hard truths. She was brutally honest, but in the sweetest, nicest way. And I think that's how Jesus is sometimes when he's honest with us, when we need to hear something from him. It's brutal, it's to the point, but it's in a very loving way. And that's who Linda was to me. And I will always remember with both Wendy and Linda, there's a couple verses in 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy where it talks about fighting the good fight and testifying when you're struggling in life. And those are two women in my life that will always testify that no matter what is going on in our life, no matter what hurts physically, emotionally, that Jesus can still be the head of that. That you can still be Jesus to somebody else, even when you're not feeling your best. Now, the next person I'm going to talk about is June. And June was Linda's mother. And June was a sweet old lady. And after Linda had passed away, June kind of took Linda's place. But June was a different one. Because June had seen me through the rough years. And June supported me in nearly everything I ever did. If I wanted to go to youth camp and I was raising funds for youth camp, June was the first one to come up and go, "I'll pay for your youth camp." If we were doing a car wash or something like that, she'd be the first one in line with her car. Let's get it washed. June was amazing in supporting faith in people and other people. And she also had a lot of roughness in her life as well. She had lost her son, she lost her daughter, she lost her son-in-law, she lost her husband, all within a span of a couple of years. But again, she was an amazing, loving Christian woman. The next person I'm going to talk about, her name is Mama Chris. Her name is Chris. I've always called her Mama Chris. She will always be Mama Chris to me. But Mama Chris was one of my best friend's moms. And we used to go and spend when we were teenagers and we finally had cars and we were out. It wasn't cool to be at home. You didn't want to be at home. But we had one of our friends' house where we all congregated at her house. And I mean, it was not a thing to have like 10, 15 teenagers in her living room at one time every Friday night. I do not know how a woman in their financial place fed all of us, but there was always food when we walked in the door. When we came home from school, there was something cooking for dinner. There was something to eat. There was something to do. And she was one of those that in a phase in my life where I felt wholly unlovable, she showed me love. And she also saw the beauty in me when I didn't see it in myself. And she's one of those people that she's definitely not a perfect woman at all. None of us are perfect. But her life was not always rainbows and butterflies. But I knew that if something was going on in my life, I always had a soft place to go. Mama Chris was always there. I could always walk in. It didn't matter the condition of her. It didn't matter the condition of the house. It didn't matter the condition of my heart, my soul. I could walk in and she would sit me down and go, let's talk about things. So she's one of those people that also impacted my later teen years. And as part of that, she caught a lot of the ugliness that was going on during that time, not only in my church life, but in my spiritual life. And she was one of those people that I could walk in and I could blow up. And she would just absorb the shrapnel. She would just, you could say anything and you could blow off steam and do everything. And then it was like, okay, well, how are we going to fix this? How do we need to move forward from this? And she was just a beautiful person. Now, the next people I'm going to talk about are Chuck and Julie. And I met them kind of later in life. My parents knew who they were. I didn't get to know them until my late teens, early 20s. And I really didn't get to know them until later in my 30s. And they are an amazing couple that go to a church. They've been to several churches. He's really involved in fly fishing. He's a big fly fisherman. And my dad knew him through fishing at first, but he's really publicly involved. And I kind of met them more as a community member. I didn't know them for their faith until I really got to know them. And they are beautiful members of the community, and they do a whole lot of service for the community. They always do the Christmas child, like the boxes for Christmas kids. They do that every single year. They organize National Day of Prayer events. They do all sorts of stuff in the community. And when I decided to kind of, go into ministry and that kind of thing, they were some of the biggest supporters of me. Julie is an amazing woman of prayer. Like that woman, I mean, she's got a prayer woman. She lays on the floor and prays all day. And I know that when things kind of go upwards and crazy, she's the first person I know who's going to be praying for me. Sometimes I get a message from her. Don't know what's going on today, but I'm praying for you. She's one of the first people to sit there and reach out for those things. And their marriage is also a beautiful picture. They are so incredibly supportive of one another, of the highs and lows and everything else in between. And it's just a beautiful example of devoted, loving couple. And it also is a relationship of respect and definitely support for them. The other person I kind of met around the same time, her name's Trish. And Trish is another weirdo. She's the weirdo I met later in life. She's one of my favorite weirdos. But she is also one of those that when you look at her from the outside, you're going, why does she do what she does? She always seems to find herself among the people in the fringe. She used to work we had a place called CAPS, and it was when you got out of prison, you got put in this place for a couple of months, and it kind of helped you readjust to life outside of prison. And When she first took this job at Cobb's, I was like, she's crazy. Like, nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to do that. And yet, every time she would come out, she would talk about all these people that she had met and the amazing people that they were. She saw people for who they really were. And honestly, she's probably one of the people I know closest that actually shows the love of God. She doesn't see people for what they've done or who they look on the outside. She sees people for what they are on the inside. And she loves to talk to God. And I love it because I will constantly get messages from her about things that I saw this today and I know you needed it. God told me you needed it. Or she'll send me a cookie in the mail. She's an amazing baker. And she'll just go, just because I thought of you today. And the other thing is she's had this kind of life of chaos. She's done a lot of things, and she's, like I said, she's an amazing baker, an amazing cook, and she's opened up restaurants. And some of them have failed miserably. But she's also the same one that sits there and saw those failures as, if I just talked to one person, then that whole thing was worth it. If I just had one conversation with somebody in my restaurant, then that was worth it. She's an amazing soul. And the last person I'm going to talk about is somebody who isn't here today, but it's Mr. Willie Aiken. But if you've heard the story, I think I've shared it in bits and pieces. But when I first came over here, I love how John puts it. I was a willful backslider. I was willfully walking backwards from God at that point. I was like, I know you exist, but I don't want to be involved in you at this moment. And there was a lot that had put me in that place. But somehow I got dragged into it coming on a trip here. And it was when the church was up the hill, in the community center up the hill. And one Sunday we were here, and we were in the middle of worship. And Willie stopped the song, and he goes, stop the music for a second. And we're all sitting there like, okay. You know, he goes, I don't know who needs to hear this. But he's like, God's telling me that Peter needs to get out of the boat. And I was sitting there and I was like, oh, that's nice. This is for somebody. And he went and started talking about Matthew 14 when Jesus walks on water. And he said, there's somebody who is standing in the boat that God is saying, I need you to get out of the boat. I need you to trust me. I need you to take a step out in faith and get out of the boat and come to me. And the whole time, literally, I'm sitting in the back of the room going, oh, that's nice for somebody. It's a really nice story. And I went about my business. We went around the rest of our trip, and I flew home. And as soon as I got home, I realized that it didn't feel like home anymore. And when I walked in the door of my house didn't feel like my house anymore. And it was this really hard kind of knock of, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? And the funny thing is I had been watching a sermon series years before this, that I really liked, and it was a whole thing called Being Unstuck. And I had been watching it on YouTube, and I had watched the first 3 sermons, and then I started the 4th one, but I never finished it. And this is me the first day back. I'm jet lagged. I'm exhausted. My house doesn't feel like home. And the funny part is my parents aren't home. They're away off camping. There's no cell service. I can't talk to the one person I'd want to talk to. There's nobody around for me to talk to. And so I was pitying myself. I was sad, and I'm like, I'm going to lay on the couch and watch YouTube. And I was like, but I'm at least going to watch something decent, so I'll put on this sermon series. And so I put on the 4th video, and I hit play, and the pastor goes, today we're going to talk about Peter getting out of the boat. And I went, that's not very funny, God. And I listened to the sermon, and the sermon was talking about when God calls us to something, we need to get out and do it. He doesn't call us because he sits there and goes, this would be a good idea. He wants you to trust in him and move. And so that was the second time I heard about Peter getting out of the boat. So that next day actually was a Sunday, and we had to be in church. And at this point in time, after this second time, I heard God going, you're going back to Scotland. And I was like, that's a funny joke. That's not happening. And so Sunday I showed up to church, and I sat down with some of the people that had gone on the church, and I said, I think I'm supposed to be in Scotland. And we were kind of just all talking about it, and they're going, oh, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of told them about, that thing Wooly said about Peter getting out of the boat. And they're like, yeah. And they're like, it was for me. And they're like, oh, okay. And so just a few minutes later, I had somebody, still kind of before the church service started, and somebody came up to me and poked me on the shoulder. And to this day, I don't remember who it was. But they said, hey, I need to talk to you for a second. And I said, okay. And she goes, I don't know why, but God wants me to tell you something. And I said, okay, what's that? He says, get out of the boat. And I'm like, this is really not funny now, God. This is not funny. This is the third time you've said this. It's not funny anymore. And that time, essentially that minute, I knew what God was calling me to. Now, part of this, why I'm telling you this whole story, is because I would not have been where I was in that moment without all the people who came before me. Now, other than a couple of things, I can't tell you much life history about any of these people that I've mentioned. I don't know what's impacted their life. I don't know who they are. But all I know is in my life, they were people who pointed me straight to God. From a little kid all the way up through years now, every single one of those people, whether they knew it or not, were directing me to where I am now in my faith with God. And I don't know that any of them even know to this day. And honestly, I don't care if they ever know. Some of them may watch this. But I am who I am today because of them. Now, I'm saying all of this because I want to encourage you. I gave a talk to the Ladies Guild one time about being the light in somebody's life. And there's no age limit to discipling other people. There's a point when we feel like when we get to a certain age that, I've been in Christ this long, I don't need to do any more. We kind of wash our hands and go, I'm a Christian, I've done my part, I've washed dishes, I'm done. But the thing is, we're supposed to be discipling people our entire life, our whole life. And if that just means being the first one to show up at the car wash and letting somebody wash your car, or whether that means sitting in the front row and praising your heart out, that's what that looks like. If that means being kind to some random teenager, that's what it looks like. If it means driving in a raggedy old green car and singing Camelot songs, that's what it means. Because you never know what is coming and who is watching. I know there's little kids in this world that see the church, and they will go the rest of their life seeing what they saw in the church. And if they see love in the church, that's what they will see. So as we go through our life, we are meant to be testimonies. We are meant to be preparing ourselves for something else, for taking our stories. We don't have to put them on a big billboard sign that says, this is my life story. But it just has to be how can I show the love of God today? How can somebody see me today? Whether I'm in the grocery store, if I'm doing my shopping, and somebody drops something and, thank you, here, have a great day. If you continually show something to somebody, that's what they will continually see. Like I said, none of these people in my life are perfect people. I've seen some rough stuff too from them. But the beauty is I saw Jesus more than I saw anything else. And when the ugly stuff happened, I saw redemption and I saw forgiveness in that as well. So the last song we're going to sing is, I was looking for it. It's one of those ones that you get stuck in your head that you know the song from when you were really little. It's an old hymn. And I had it in my head and I could not think of the song to save my life. I've been looking for it all morning. But it's called Lord Prepare Me. And it's all about, Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary and to be a living testimony for you. And whether you're, a new Christian, an old Christian, anything like that, we should be asking God to prepare us for those moments that we can be a testimonial part of someone else's testimony. Because like I said, I just mentioned these people today, and those are some key people, but there's a lot more that I could go through. We could be here for the next, year and a half, and every week I could dedicate to somebody in my life who has been something for me, who has pointed me in some way to Jesus. And I'm going to end kind of with 1 Peter 3:15. It just says, let our hearts be set apart for the Lord. Always be prepared to give a defense to everyone who asks you to account for the hope that he lives within you. And do it with humility and respect. God calls us to be love. Jesus calls us the first of these is love. And how are you showing love to people in your life today? Are people seeing Jesus in you? One day, will somebody stand behind a pulpit and talk about the way that you've been in their life? Will somebody stand behind a screen and tell you? You may never hear it, you may never see it, but we are called to be a living testimony. And so we're going to